Welcome to Castomancy, the only podcast that already knows you're going to have a great day, one of these days. Coming up on this episode, we'll be discussing the ancient I Ching. We'll also learn how to conduct yourself if you see a ghost, how best to contact aliens, and how you might avoid the upcoming end of the world. As always, we'll be answering your listener questions, which are for entertainment purposes only. Please don't take any important actions based on the advice you hear here. Talk to your doctor, make your own investments, and definitely do not start a land war in Asia, no matter what the oracle says. So throw your bones and investigate your sheep entrails. It's time for Castomancy. Okay, everybody, like I mentioned before, today we're going to be talking about the I Ching. Some of you have probably already heard about this oracle, so, well, maybe find another show. But we are going to ask it some weird questions, so stick around for those. For those of you who haven't heard of the I Ching, you'll want to know what it is, so here's what it is. It's a really old book. That's it. That's the whole story. Thanks for listening. No, the book is very old. It's originally, I think it was written around 1000 BC, so that's like the Iron Age. The Assyrians were running around during that time. The Phoenicians just got their alphabet. Big hit, by the way. Japan was just starting to get into rice cultivation at that time, so it's very old. And there's a few mythological stories about how this book came to be, the legendary origins. The first one that I came across was that it was generated by a man named Fu Xi, and I'm sorry for any Chinese speakers. My pronunciation is going to be painful, so you will have to deal with that. So he was apparently living around 3000 BC, and he was probably the first emperor of China, and I think the legends also say that he was a dragon, so that's really neat. And the one story about Fu Xi finding these was that he just contemplated nature so hard that he found the basic elements of these diagrams that make up the I Ching. The other story that I personally like more was that he saw a turtle come out of the water and saw the symbols on its back, which I think is tied to another diagram called the Lo Shu, if you ever want to get into this stuff, but that's a whole different topic. Speaking of turtles, you should really appreciate your modern oracles, okay? Because a long time ago, things were much more difficult in ancient China. What they would do is they would go turtle fishing. They would just get a ton of turtles, and they would generally write, I think they would write questions on the turtle shell first, and then throw it in a fire, and wait for the shell to crack, and then they would have their answer based on the formation of the cracks and where they made their marks on the turtle shell. I also think originally they would just throw the shell in the fire, look at the cracks, and then write their interpretations down on the shell after it cracked. So this was a big... I wish I could say how many turtles died to do this. There were tons and tons and tons of turtles. There were mounds of turtle bones found in this way. And you can still see some of these original turtle divinations in a museum in Taiwan. They've got a couple of them on display. So, you got to think about it. Every time these days you just want to do some divination, you get your pendulum out, you get your tarot cards out. You don't have to go to the river anymore and take up a turtle and catch it on fire. So it's a lot simpler. And it's said that the original emperors would consult the I Ching every day, every morning when they woke up. So hopefully they were using the other methods that we're going to get into instead of waking up, having a cup of tea, and then also burning a turtle, probably alive. So there were some origin stories that were even before Fu Xi, and remember he was around 3000 BC. So there was a story that maybe the I Ching came from the Shang dynasty, and actually that dynasty was once thought to be a myth. People didn't even think it was real. There was a group of women who were called Many Fu in English. I don't know what that is in Chinese, sorry. But they were female diviners who examined live turtle shells. And I don't have the details on how exactly they examined the turtle shells. Well, I'm assuming they weren't burning them because they were alive, so they did something different but similar. So already you can see turtle is a very big deal with this oracle and its origins. So these ladies, they examined the turtle shells, and they eventually became queens of in the Shang dynasty, which is pretty impressive. So they must have been doing something right. Lao Tzu, the guy who started Taoism, probably, he may have been a descendant of these ladies. So yeah, so ladies, if you want to get started, go to your pet shop today and get a bunch of turtles and start your empire. Seems real easy. So they had a lot of success though. So what we know for sure, moving away from the mythological origins, is there was a man named King Wen. He was a real guy. He wrote down the original book, and it wasn't what we have today. It was a lot less information, but he started it. And he wrote the book in prison. He was actually imprisoned by the Shang dynasty, which I'm noticing is a trend that we're seeing a lot with these diviners. A lot of these people end up getting thrown in jail, and I guess there's nothing else to do, so they just work on their systems or forecast the future. So that King Wen is in prison. He's writing his book. He's getting the original information down. And I really want to talk about the Shang dynasty quick. It's an aside, but man, these people were crazy. They were so corrupted. It was unbelievable. They had an artificial lake with an island, and they would stock it with deer meat all over the island. There's skewers of meat, and they would feast, and they would have these crazy murder orgies. Yeah, that's right. They would do both at the same time. So they were pretty depraved. So they lost their mind, and King Wen was trying to overthrow them, and his son would later finish that off, and they would get rid of the Shang. So anyways, King Wen, he added all the names to the hexagrams that we have. He studied the trigrams that make up the hexagrams, which is what the I Ching ponders primarily. And after the Shang dynasty was defeated, King Wu, which was King Wen's son, he added the commentary to all of the figures. So Wen got the ball rolling. His son really added a lot to it. And then later on, Confucius got a hold of this book. And Confucius was, in my opinion, not very interesting because he was very down to earth. He was just concerned with laws and the boring stuff of life. He didn't care about the mystical or the weird. So he added a bunch of conduct rules, or how to conduct oneself. And he actually never used it for divination at all. He didn't like that. He didn't like that kind of thing. So he tried to bring it down to earth, I guess. He did add a lot, and not all of it, it's all interesting. It's just not something I'm particularly interested in. Later, the I Ching was actually almost burned. It almost was completely lost. There was the Qin dynasty, and they burned tons of books. They got rid of a lot of things, and who knows how much was lost in that. But the I Ching, they actually liked it, and they said it was one of the 5 classics and spared it. So we still have it to this day. It's had a long life on this planet, and we still have it by some miracle. Later, the Han dynasty, they actually really enjoyed the I Ching, and I think it was around 200 BC they canonized the book and added the wings. The wings of the I Ching are the texts that correspond to each line of a hexagram, and that'll make more sense later, but they added a lot of work to the book. There's some more information, but basically after that, we will focus on, it moved west. Westerners found it, and they some of them really fell in love with it. And it's really only been over the past 150 years that the I Ching has been in the West. So it's not been that long, but it's been translated many times now, some better than others. And honestly, it's not until the 1960s that the I Ching really took off in popularity with Carl Jung, the psychologist. He was a big part of that. He loved it. He loved the book and the text and using it. And, of course, a lot of hippies and wizards came out in the 60s and 70s, so they latched onto it as well. And it really spread quite a bit since the 60s. So that's it for the history lesson for this episode. Let's talk about the structure. So let's talk about the structure of the I Ching. What is it exactly? All right, so like I said before, it's a book. And it's ultimately a book about two forces, yin and yang. Okay, I'm sure you've heard about this. Most people have. So yang or yang is the active force. It's masculine, it's hot, it's moving, it's expansive. And then yin is the feminine force. So it's dark, it's cold, it's concealing, it's basically positive and negative, and not in a good bad way, but a polarity kind of way. So in Chinese philosophy and in Taoist philosophy more specifically, these are the two forces that make up everything. They say that makes up the 10,000 things. So it makes up the whole world, the interaction of these two forces, and they're complementary forces. They're not antagonistic towards one another. Excuse me. So these two forces come together in the first form, which is a bigram, and a bigram is just two lines stacked on each other, and there's two types of lines. There's a solid line and a broken line. The solid line is a yang line, and the broken line is a yin line, and they combine 4 times to make 4 different bigrams the first time. So it could be a solid line on top of a solid line, a broken line on top of a solid line, a broken line on top of a broken line, and a broken line on top of a solid line. And these are, and not in the same order, they're called old yang, young yang, old yin, and young yin. So it's kind of the initial family, if you will. So these bigrams combine, they almost synthesize to make something called a trigram, which if you probably guessed it, there's a set of 3 lines instead of 2 lines. So the trigrams are actually really very important to this system. It's what makes up the hexagrams that we'll consider later in the I Ching broadly. But the trigrams are really popular. There's 8 of them, and they're widespread. They're even on the South Korean flag, if you want to look that up. Not all of them, but some of them are on the flag. They're used in martial arts, divination just by themselves, certain magical systems. Feng Shui uses these in kind of a compass. The Lo Shu has them on it, like I mentioned before. And you can think of them really quickly as an introduction as 8 elements. They're not quite the same as a Western element, but they are basically the same idea. So there's 8 of them, and really quickly their names are, in the order they're usually presented. Heaven or sky, it's all 3 solid lines, it's all yang. The next one is lake or marsh. It's also called the joyous, and I guess I'm not going to tell you what kind of lines they are because that's probably boring to listen to. The next one is fire or glow. It's also called clinging or radiance, and clinging because fire seems to cling to things. The next one is thunder, or the arousing, shaking. I think in ancient China they used to think lightning came out of the ground, or thunder came out of the ground, almost like an earthquake sound. So after thunder is wind or air. It's also called the gentle. After that is water, or the abysmal. So water is kind of a dangerous one a lot of the times. It's not like life-giving water. Usually it's like the deep, the absolute terror of the abyss. After that is mountain, which is called keeping still. And the last one, the 8th one, is called ground or earth, or the receptive. And that one is all yin. And so you have heaven and earth at the extremes and all the things in between. So each of these also has its own associations. There will be things like direction, materials, colors, sounds, organs. I think probably days of the week. Basically anything you can think of, people have assigned to one of these 8 trigrams. And now these trigrams, there are 3 lines each. You stack one on top of the other, and you get 64 hexagrams. And a hexagram is a series of 6 lines, right? So they're made up of 2 trigrams. This whole thing is a very mathematical system. It's basically binary mathematics with a series of 6 digits. And so each of these hexagrams is like an expanded meaning, and it's a consideration of what's happening in that image. So if you had water above fire, or fire above water, You'd think about what does that mean? What is nature trying to inform us? What happens during that kind of situation? So you use the elemental symbols of the trigrams to contemplate the larger hexagrams. There's way more depth to it than that, but that's a very simple version. But anyway, so when you put them together, you get the hexagram. Each hexagram, this is really what makes up the bulk of the I Ching, are the hexagrams, and each one of them has a symbol, a name, a meaning, a bunch of commentary, and then line interpretations for each of the 6 lines. And the reason you think about each of the 6 individual lines is because I Ching means the book of changes or mutations. And a huge part of this is that you will do the work, you'll get a hexagram, and that hexagram will be probably changing. So it's a book about the examination of this moment and what it is moving towards and how it's the path it's probably going to take. So some of the lines in your reading will be changing or mutating, and they each have their own meaning, and they each give a little bit of special information. So in every reading, it may be a little bit different. In other words, if you didn't have the changing lines in this text, you would always just get the answer. You would get the hexagram. There wouldn't be anything unique about it, but each time it opens up an avenue for novelty to emerge. So every reading will be a little bit different than the other one. So that's it for the structure. Let's talk about the usage and how you actually consult this oracle. The old school way is really quite difficult. You needed to take 50 yarrow stalks, which is a type of plant. You just take the stalks, you get 50. You take one out, I think, and then you split them into 2 piles, and then you start grabbing 4 at a time out until some kind of math happens. I don't really remember the whole process. It's very complicated. Not many people use it. Ideally, if you can, you're supposed to get yarrow stalks from Confucius's grave, but those are in rare supply, so there are easier methods. And the one that we are going to use this episode, or the one that I used for this episode, is the 3-coin method. It's very modern, but it's very easy. So basically, you take 3 coins, you throw them or flip them all at once, and then you see what your result was. And so there's 4 outcomes. If you have all heads, that's old yang. It's a yang line that's going to be changing to a yin line. So that's a mutating line. The idea being that yang is so long established that it's about to effectively die and turn to the opposite polarity, which is a yin line. All tails is old yin, so that's a yin line that's going to change to a yang line. And the way I read this is 2 heads, 1 tail is a young yin, so that's a stable yin. It's just turned into a yin line in the theory, and so it's got a long life ahead of it, so it's more stable than the old lines. And then 2 tails, 1 head is young yang line, so that's a stable yang line in your reading. I've seen people use dice. I've come across dice methods as well. Those are pretty handy, and I'm sure there's other methods that I'm not aware of. So if you do know of them, let me know. And if you're really lazy, you can just use an app. You just download the I Ching app, and it will tell you everything you need to know. So basically, once you get your coins, you throw them 6 times. You start at the bottom, throw them once, you get your first line. And that's going to be one of the old or young yin or yang lines. Throw them again, you get your next line up, you get your next line up. You keep doing it 6 times until you've got your first hexagram. And then if you have any changing lines, you will look that up in the book later. But once you get your first hexagram, most copies of the I Ching have a table that you can look them up in. So you'll have your top trigram and your bottom trigram. You find those and you kind of find it on the chart. It's a lot like the Napoleon's Oracle chart that we did in the first episode. You find your hexagram, you go to your hexagram, you read the commentary on it, and then if you did have any changing lines, you'll read the text about those lines, those specific lines. and they will lead you to a new hexagram, and you can read that hexagram as the kind of what's coming up hexagram. We're going to obviously get into that in practice here, so you'll get a better feel for what's going on. So that is about it. Let's go to the questions. Okay guys, so let's get into our crazy questions that we posed to this oracle. The very first question is, how should one conduct themselves when they see a ghost? Ghosts are very scary, and they can make you feel like total shit when you see them. If you see them, they can be insane. The real quick advice of this is maybe if you can keep their cool, they'll go away, or you can actually get something out of the situation. And you may need to leave them an offering, because the text actually talks about that a little bit. So the first hexagram that we had was oppression, which I think is great for when you see a ghost, because that's how it feels. It says oppression, success, perseverance. The great man brings about good fortune, no blame. When one has something to say, it is not believed. And it's a bit contradictory in this case. There's a little bit of good, a little bit of bad. And I really like the last line that says, when you have something to say, it's not believed. And that's curious, because generally speaking, if you have an experience with a ghost, people don't really believe you if you try and share that story. So it's funny that the I Ching would mention that here. The image, it says, there's no water in the lake, the image of exhaustion. Thus the superior man stakes his life on following his will. We had a lot of changing lines on this, which is, generally speaking, is considered to be a very chaotic situation, which it is. If you see a ghost, it's crazy. So how should you conduct yourself? Oppression. Basically, it just talks about decline. The image is lake being above and water being below. So I guess the idea is that the lake has been drained, and that the dark trigram is above the light trigram. And Wilhelm's commentary in this says, thus everywhere superior men are oppressed and held in restraint by inferior men. So it's really kind of interesting. The idea of the ghost in this case would be the inferior man oppressing the superior man, which would be us in this case, the light lines. And it's neat because in Chinese philosophy, ghosts are considered to be yin energy or dark energy. So we asked, how do you conduct yourself? And it gives us a situation. It says, well, there's the ghost, it's oppressing you. What do you do? And basically you need to just deal with the adversity and make the best of it. There's nothing you can do but really remain true to yourself, right? So that's what the advice says in the text. And that's it. Basically deal with it in your way, basically. Whatever you feel is appropriate it says superior to all external fate. So when you see one, focus on your inner worlds. This is a crazy situation. Don't be too concerned about the ghost, I guess. Just keep yourself together and focus on your own control and yourself. And this will lead us to the second hexagram. The second hexagram was decrease in this case. So maybe this is the ghost decreasing. If you can remain true to yourself and stay cool and just kind of roll with it. It says decrease combined with sincerity brings about supreme good fortune without blame. One may be persevering in this. It furthers one to undertake something. How is this to be carried out? One may use 2 small bowls for the sacrifice. I don't really know what that is getting into with the sacrifice, but if you're inclined, maybe that's what's necessary for the ghost. Maybe you can make a friend. And then basically here, the image is it's a lake at the bottom of a mountain, and the mountain has kind of overshadowed it, and it's very stern. It can be very angry, and the lake has been evaporated, and it's gone up and covered the mountain, which has kind of cooled the mountain off. The problem is it's talking about the what is below is decreased to the benefit of what is above in the Richard Wilhelm's commentary. So the foundations of a building are decreased in order to strengthen what's above it. So it can get a bit top heavy. So you got to be careful with how much you're decreasing. So in this case, how does it apply to seeing a ghost? You know, I don't know. Honestly, this is a tricky one. But again, it says one must draw on the strength of the inner attitude to compensate for what is lacking in the externals. And it's about expressing what's in your heart, even with slender means, it says. So you really need, it says, the last thing I'm going to read to you here is, by the decrease of the lower powers of the psyche, the higher aspects of the soul are enriched. So we asked about a ghost, and we have this soul being enriched. And it says anger must be decreased by keeping still, and the instincts must be curbed by restriction. So really, my takeaway is, when you see the ghost, it's going to be crazy, it's going to be oppressive. Be still, keep your own focus, keep your own composure, and the whole situation will be a boon to everyone. You'll come away stronger for it. It's not going to be spooky, it's not going to be that bad. If you kind of ignore the ghost, I guess it's going to go away. It's not going to be so intense, and you'll be better off. That's a tricky one. I'd like to hear your thoughts. The hexagrams in this one were oppression leading to decrease. What do you do when you see a ghost? That was the answer. Something to contemplate. The next question we have was how to make contact with benevolent aliens. The short answer is probably don't do it, because it's not going to be good. The first hexagram we have was revolution. And guys, this hexagram basically just talks about government revolution. So it's really big changes. Changing the form of government brings good fortune, it says. Don't do anything on the surface level. This is going to be a huge change. And it really does talk about the two forces in this. The two trigrams is fire and water, and they're combating each other. So it's chaos. It's a big battle to establish a new order once these forces find their home. And then it goes to the hexagram for family. And basically it just talks about family relations and their appropriate positions and keeping the harmony within a family. So how do you contact benevolent aliens? The answer is revolution, which is a bit crazy to me that it would suggest that, but I guess if you want aliens to visit, you need to start a war and have crazy revolutions. Maybe once you establish a new government, they'll like it and they'll come, or they'll see the chaos and the nukes flying and say, whoa, 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 time out. And then we have the hexagram of the family, which suggests proper relationships, maybe an extended family now that we have aliens here. And we're all one big happy family, and we got to figure out where we stand with each other. Really crazy revolution. Either way, it's going to be chaos. So if you want to find them, have a war party, and then once the world is in absolute chaos or the revolution has been completed, the aliens will show up and we'll have a new family, which is crazy. It does not seem like it's worth the effort, guys. So please nobody start a war in order to get aliens to show up, which actually makes me wonder if there aren't some factions out there already trying that. Hopefully not. That's where the I Ching stands on the question of how to contact aliens. No, you don't use your heart or soul or open up with positive intentions. You start a revolution. Great. Next question. How to avoid the upcoming end of the world. All right. We had a really interesting hexagram come up for the first one. It's called before completion, which is interesting because we're asking how do we get ready for the upcoming end of the world? And it's talking about before that happens. It says before completion, success. But if the little fox, after nearly completing the crossing, gets his tail in the water, there is nothing that would further. The image is fire over water. Is conditioned before transition. The superior man is careful in the differentiation of things so that each finds its place. So really it's saying, make sure everything is in order. Make sure you have everything where it needs to be. Take your time, make the checklist, double check it, and get all your stuff ready before any of this happens. Because if you make a mistake, your tail's going to get wet and it's going to be a total failure. So no pressure, just relax and have fun with it. And then the changing line was line 3, and it says, before completion, attack brings misfortune. It furthers one across the great water. So it's good to have a big project. It's good to push forward. Do not attack anyone at this point in time. Do not fight anyone, no matter how crazy things get. Try to resist the battle urge, and just get your own stuff in order and make sure that it's ready, because there is a change coming up according to the I Ching. And, appropriately, that's what we were asking about. So do not make any mistakes, because everything will be in vain, it says. It's very, very interesting. So we're going to have to be very careful. And so if you can do that, we have the changing hexagram, the second hexagram, which is the cauldron, which is what we have. We haven't talked about that one yet, but it does come up again in the next question. So fire over wood, the cauldron. Basically, it's a cauldron full of good food, and it's cooking. It says, the image of the cauldron. The superior man consolidates his fate by making his position correct. And that's about it. It just goes on talking about the important takeaways are not throwing things in it for fun. Don't burn things for fun. Just cook what you have. Work with what you have and what you need to work with. Do not sacrifice for the sake of self-interest. It does not bring goodness, it says. Things are going well, but don't forget to share with others. If you have an illness, wait for recovery. So if you are a little bit tired after the end of the world, it's understandable, but take a break. Make sure you're in good health before you range the apocalypse. And it's really a neat message here. It says, don't get too self-interested and share with people. So basically, get everything in order now, before, get all your stuff ready, and make sure it's what you need, and make sure you don't have any extra garbage, or you're not wasting your time. And then after the end of the world, whatever that means, share with people, share with what you have, and no fighting. There's no time to be fighting, right now at least, with the first hexagram. That is it. Those are the weird questions that I posed to the I Ching. The next question is one that we can actually verify. If you guys follow the crypto markets at all, there's a bit of a meltdown happening. So Bitcoin has not been doing well. I know people were saying it was going to $1 million, and in fact, it went the other way. It went back down to about 30,000, which is, it moves. It's crypto, but we want to know which way it's going to go from here. Is it going to go down or back up? And in this case, the I Ching is very clear. Bitcoin will be going to zero. So if you have Bitcoin, you may not want to have Bitcoin. Of course, do your own research, but here's what we had. We had the cauldron come up again for the first hexagram, which is normally a pretty good hexagram, but in this case, there was a changing line, and that was line 4, and it says, the legs of the ting, which is the cauldron, are broken. The prince's meal is spilled, and his person is soiled. Misfortune. Great. So we asked what Bitcoin is going to do, and we get this beautiful word picture. So not only is our pot broken and our food spilled out, it's spilled all over the prince. So he's messy. We're very embarrassed, and nobody's getting any food. So that's really so bad for Bitcoin in this case. It's not a good hexagram to have come up. And then it's changing into work on what has been spoiled. Oh boy. So there's a big mess, and it's really curious that would come up like that. Yes, your soup spilled, and then also we have the hexagram, work on what has been spoiled. It's the image of decay. The winds blow low on the mountain. Thus the superior man stirs up the people and strengthens their spirit. So really, it's a mess. It's a complete mess. But there is the hint of a rally after the mess. So, I'm going to say personally, I'm not going to have any Bitcoin right now until much later, because I was looking at the charts. It's at 30 now, and the next level of support was 10,000. So buy the dip, I suppose. It's not looking good for Bitcoin. I'm really curious to see which way it goes after this consultation with the Oracle, the I Ching. We don't have any listener questions this time, guys. Nobody had any questions for us, which is fine. This will be a little shorter episode. But if you do, I would love to answer your questions on the show. Please send them to me at castamancer@castamancy.com, or you can find us on Facebook and just send them to me there. So that is it for this question section. Now we are going to review the oracle in the next section. We'll see you there. Okay, this is where we break down the oracle into a bunch of categories and kind of do a review. The first category is going to be ease of use. Guys, the I Ching is really easy to use. You need a pen and a paper, a couple of coins, and the book itself. So you basically just throw your coins and write down your mark down your answer, and then read about it in the text. Very easy to use. There's really not much else to be said about ease of use with this one. It's very, very user-friendly. The next category is learning curve. It's actually a pretty simple system, like I was saying, especially with the coin method. You throw the coins, you look up the answer in the book. So it's pretty straightforward. The bulk of the work, the contemplation, the text, all of that's been done for you and written down in the book. So if you're a real by-the-book person, and once you know how to look up your hexagrams, you're golden. There's really not much else to learn beyond that. And I'm sorry if you hear everything in the background. You're just going to have to deal with that. Next category is clarity of answers. The answers are very direct. They'll tell you this is what it is. But sometimes they're a little dated in their descriptions of things. Not many of us are running around in ox carts anymore. And sometimes they're a little poetic. So they can be a little dreamy, a little wishy-washy, a little tough to apply. So oftentimes you'll really need to think about what the text is saying, which is great. It really is. It's good to think about your situation and take these points of view that are provided to you, but they're not going to be so direct that it's just like click into place. Sometimes they will, but it's not always clear. And other times it's horrifying how direct it is. It really feels like the book is speaking to you directly. Intuitive application. How much of your intuition are you going to have to bring to the table? If you're, like I said, if you're a by-the-book person, you can just read the text and that's about it. And you can try to apply your answer. But in reality, you're going to need to do the contemplation and think about what is being said. And if you want to go really deep, some people don't even use the text. There's some street readers that do this just on the sidewalk, and they don't use the text. They get the hexagrams and they just completely intuitively shoot from the hip, like the original contemplators were doing. They had the hexagrams, they had the meaning, the trigrams. They had the meaning of those kind of established, and then they just thought about it and came up with what they wanted to write down, and that became codified later, but somebody had to do it to begin with, right? So guys, I do apologize for the background noise, I promise. If you give me $100 a month, I will build a nice studio and you won't ever have to hear this again. So pony up. If you like it, of course. But the depth, let's talk about that. The depth of the system. You could spend your entire lifetime, and probably many lifetimes. In fact, I think Confucius said that if he was able to, he would come back and just study the I Ching over and over and over. The infamous evil wizard Aleister Crowley also said something like that. He's basically like, you know what, all this goofing around with all this other stuff, I guess I don't really care about that. I just want to study the I Ching forever. So it catches a lot of people's attention. It's got mathematical structure, which can keep you very busy, and that generates meaning. The structure, the mathematical structure does. There's the poetic meanings. You can contemplate the elements and how they interact. There's an inner mathematical structure that you can contemplate. Really cool. Tons of thoughts, lots of history, lots of authors, lots of details. There's so much to get into. You really could spend forever plinking around with this system. And of course, it ties into the larger philosophical systems of the East, namely Taoism and its offshoots. So you could really go infinitely deep if you'd like to. Excuse me. Next category, portability. Guys, I already told you this, but if you have the book, if you have the 3 coins, and like a pen and a paper, you've got it. You've got everything you need. So it's very portable. You could carry this around in your man bag or whatever you want to bring, your purse. If you really needed to, you could just get the app and have it on your phone. The whole text is there. I think it's all public domain, Wilhelm's translation. So ultimately, it's a very portable system. And if you really wanted to minimize it, like, you could just memorize all the hexagrams and all the meanings. And some people I know have done that. They spend a lot of time with this work, and they just can just do the hexagram with a pen and paper and their coins and just tell you, oh, yeah, this is that hexagram. This line's changing. This means that. I remember everything in the entire book, which is crazy. So finally, the aesthetic, the gestalt of the I Ching. It's great. I personally love it. My attention's been hooked on this one for a while, and its sister systems. It's a book. I mean, there's not really a look to it, but books are cool. It's got this real cool old book feel to it. It's an old wise book, an old book of wisdom. The language and translations, most of them are done really well, and they're just mysterious enough to really get the intuition going and really get that contemplative mood going. Some editions have the original glyphs, the old pictograms for the hexagrams, and those are really fun to see and do a deep dive on the old images that they associated with these things. Tossing coins is really cool. It's, a lot of people, everybody knows about flipping a coin to decide your fate. And here you got 3 of them, so more of a good thing, I guess. It's really simple, but it's just enough of a gesture to make it feel important and special. And the I Ching is also featured in Big Trouble in Little China, which is probably the best movie ever made. So every time you get to consult this, you get to LARP as Egg Chen and really feel like a cool, old, mystical Taoist wizard. So very fun. What does it seem well suited for? It's really good to down-to-earth questions. But I think if you get too mundane or too goofy with it, it will tend to get sassy with you. I've seen it myself a couple of times, and a lot of people report that it doesn't like foolish questions. And another thing that I hear people report is that if you ask it the same question too often, there is a certain hexagram, and I can't remember which one it is, but it tells you a little story about a student who bothered a master too often. So it's really funny. The people, if they're asking the same question over and over, it will almost say, listen, you're the student, I'm the master, I told you already, I gave you my answer, quit bothering me. It's really neat. It's good for giving nuanced answers. You can really pluck out some details with this. And it's good advice, generally speaking. It almost always tells you to persevere. It's a positive message, no blame. It's a really kind text. Even if it's a tough or bad situation, it often says there's something that you can still gain. There's a proper way to conduct yourself. To carry yourself like the superior man is really the focus of this text, which is, it's great. It's a wonderful thing to focus on in your life. And like I said before, it's got a really neat mystical feeling to it with the text, the way that it writes. But so it's probably not good for like party readings or slumber parties. Maybe leave it at home. All right, guys, that's it for the I Ching for this episode. We're going to get into the previous question reviews from last episode now. So I'll catch you there. Okay, so last time we used the Lenormand Oracle, which is a cartomantic system, 36 cards. We used the 3-card reading method, and we asked a couple of questions. One of them, I think we can actually answer. There was one question we asked: how do you defeat a reptilian? If you know what reptilians are, you know what they are. But I haven't actually fought one yet, so I don't know if the advice it gave us was good. It basically did tell us to just beat the hell out of them or expose them in some way, to confront them directly, but I haven't seen one, so I'm out of the fight for now. How did mankind's first trip to Mars go? But unless I've missed something, we're still earthbound, so we can't verify that yet. Here's the one that I did ask that we could verify. What would the weather be like in London, England on May 4th? And it's interesting because we actually had the clouds card come up, so came to the conclusion that it would be a cloudy, stormy day. And sure enough, it was. It was cloudy and rainy, which is not out of the usual for this time of year or in London, England especially. So perfect. Really good answer on that one. And I think if we had asked more verifiable questions, which maybe we should. I don't know if we want to shift into that. I like the crazy stuff. But that's it. That's it for the show, guys. So please join us next time when we explore the runes. And if you would like to pose a personal question to the runes, send me an email at castamancer@castamancy.com, or find me on Facebook. It's just Castamancy, and you can send me a message there. Again, make sure you subscribe or whatever you do with podcasts. That would be cool. I guess I don't have anything else to say. I do want to say thank you for putting up with the background noise in this episode and for my stuffy, tired voice. I've been sick. So I'm getting better. So I had just enough power to get this wonderful content out to you. Hope you enjoy it. Thank you so much for listening. Castamancers, I'll see you in the future.